All right, it is game time. These boys are about to go at it. They're seated and ready to go. And of course, we're going to say bye to our analysts for now. We're going to bring on some casters, the commentary team, to talk and walk you through every play-by-play that's going to happen here. Jan Nepomniachtchi versus Arjun Erigaisi. It's going to happen in 10 seconds. You see the clock up there, boys and girls. Get ready. Put your predictions in the chat as it's going down here as we bring on our casters for today's match and all the matches today is going to be Grandmaster Ramon Hamilton and Grandmaster Eric Hansen. Let's go, guys.
Thank you, James, for the introduction. And these players, Eric, need no introduction. Jan Nepomniachtchi, Aurora Gaming, and of course, Genji's Arjun Erigaisi.
Yeah, this is the quarterfinals and probably the first day where I'm seeing a significant crowd presence. You have fans from both teams here in the Stadium B cheering on their players.
Yeah, there's actually a huge crowd of about 15, 20 fans that just walked in. And Eric, they're all supporting Genji. That must be a little intimidating for Jan. It's nice to see that the fans are rallying behind their players.
Yeah, as a player, I've always enjoyed when there's a crowd. It just feels like this is the big moment you played, chess your whole life for.
There you go. Well, let's get into things right here. Arjun starts with the white pieces, and Eric, immediately, it looks like a very equal position, very symmetrical. But one thing that I noticed, key difference, pawn on c3 for white, knight on c6 for black. And the knight on c6 is not a great piece here, so it's going to take some time before Jan can really maneuver that knight to a better square.
It's going to take a bit of time, but one thing we know about Jan Nepomniachtchi, he's played a World Championship match, and he uses the Petrov all the time. He's very, very well prepared here. I'm curious to see what Erigaisi decides in terms of how to press. And G3 already is a move. Just looking at it visually, not the most common move, right, Amon?
Yep. No, it looks strange because it's destabilizing the knight on f3, but the reality is that the next move is going to be king to g2. The king is going to defend the knight, and once the knight is defended, then the queen from d1 can move away. If you move the queen away without playing g3, Eric, the bishop would capture that knight, the pawns would be doubled, that would be terrible. So this is just a way for Arjun to develop that queen on the next move.
Yeah, and if you're looking from white's perspective here, you see it's fairly symmetrical. What's a position you'd like? I want black's bishop on h5 to take the knight on f3. I'll take back with the queen, and I'll have a bishop pair. The bishop pair, we talk about it quite a bit. It can give you a small advantage, especially when there's lots of pawns on the board, both sides of the position. That's the type of exchange that's beneficial for white. Black's perspective, he probably doesn't want to do that. Probably that bishop on h5, it's trying to be a nuisance on h5. But once white invests some time and deals with it, it's going to fall back to g6. Challenge that good light squared bishop on d3. And again, in the Petrov, black is always asking white to push something. Black's job, fairly simple. I castle, maybe bring that queen on d8 up to d7, move that dark squared bishop out of the way. It could be f6, it could be f8. And we're looking at trades on the e-file. And again, even look at the pawn structure. Yes, there's a knight on c6, but there's no pressure from white right now. d5 can't be attacked by two of white's pieces yet. Queen b3, is that a decent move? It is. It hits b7. It puts a little bit of pressure on b5, but Arjun is going to need to use more pieces to actually pose a real threat.
And that's the thing, Eric. You mentioned the d5 pawn. Yes, you can attack it with the queen, but look at the positioning of the other pieces. The dark square bishop will never be able to help with that. Against the double G pawns, usually a very good way to play against them is to play a move like h4. We've seen this restricting move throughout the event so far, and the move h4 also comes with the idea of rook to h1 and h5. So you could actually see an initiative develop on the king side here, but that queen b3 move, it draws the knight into the c4 square here. I think that Nepo can be pretty happy with this maneuver because I was mentioning the knight on c6 would want to reposition anyway.
Wants to reposition, and on c4 we see that if it gets harassed, black can probably trade on f4, bring the knight back to d6, and we're getting closer and closer to an endgame where even with those ideas you mentioned, that pawn on h3 pushes to h4, pushes to h5, you try to pry open the king side, well, you need pieces to continue that attack. So Arjun has to balance that. How can he actually generate that while avoiding mass trades on the e-file?
That's right, and things are just settling in here. Bishop g5, queen d7. We want to remind our viewers that we are in the quarterfinals here, and it is a single elimination. So this match will eliminate one of these players right now. Also, Eric in the quarterfinals, 4 games. So a bit of a wider spread, more games to decide who the better player is today.
Yeah, I think with a 4-game match, it changes things a little bit. Players, when they have their first game with white, they don't necessarily feel like they have to win that. I mean, they're going to try to, but let's say it's a draw. They have time to come back. It's significantly longer. You know, you're not playing someone who you feel like, I lose a game, I'm in a must-win situation. They're so good at drawing, so pretty much if you lose a game, you lose. Not in a 4-game match. We've seen lots of comebacks. I just want to say I like what Arjun's doing. He's imbalancing the position. That bishop g5 move a couple moves ago, it's a key move because he avoided a trade, and what he was trying to do was pull that f7 pawn to f6. If you can ever pull that, that queen on c2 is likely taking the g6 pawn even at the expense of a piece. That knight on f3 can join the game. So he's playing on both sides of the board. He's keeping the idea of maybe h4, h5 in the future, but right now c4 comes with just the basic threat of c5, forking the pieces. And yes, you can trade on the e-file once, but if you're black, do you want to trade once? No, you want to trade twice. You want to trade and bring another rook there, because if you just trade once and then play a passive move, you've given white control of the e-file.
Yeah, you can't afford to just do that without a follow-up. So if all the rooks could trade off, in fact, if the rooks and the queens, all the major pieces could trade off here, the endgame would be perfectly good for Jan Nepomniachtchi. But I don't think we're going to see that that happen here. Arjun is not going to allow that. As you said, playing on both sides of the board, I still like the idea of h4, h5, but I think he's maintaining that. He first wants to create some threats on the queen side. And you know what? They're difficult to meet, because if you take on c4, well, b takes c4 back. How do you actually stop c5? It looks like you need to move one of these pieces.
He's calculating dc4, bc4, queen a4. I think that's one of the moves. If you can get the queens off, that could be an endgame to play. We have it on the board. That was the only move that I actually saw that I was comfortable with. And it's being played. This is a question for Arjun. I don't see how you avoid a queen trade. It doesn't mean it's a draw in position, really equal. No, the pawn structure's a little bit imbalanced. And as white, I'm looking at c5. You know what c5 does? It commits your pawns on dark squares, but it might be a way to win the diagonal. You play c5, the bishop for black has to retreat. Maybe my bishop on g5 goes back to f4. I'm trying to provoke a move like c6, because if I ever provoke a move like c6 with my pawn on c5, then a move like rook b1 is very effective, looking at that b7 pawn. And once again, if I have that diagonal, if I get my bishop on f4, I'm cutting off the rook b8 defensive maneuver.
Exactly, and I think we may actually see all those moves happen. In terms of c6, I agree. It looks bad right on the spot. You play c6, rook to b1 looks like trouble. So what we might see instead is, if you want to defend that pawn, rook c8. But, you know, rook c8 gives up the e-file. I think rook e to c8 could be a consideration here. And you also have to look at that knight on a4. You know, it's not a piece that white can actually win, but it is sidelined, and it will take some time to get back. Look out for the knight on a4 to jump into c3 and into d5. If black can achieve that, all of a sudden, Jan might have a phenomenal position.
Time is pretty competitive. As you mentioned, that knight on a4 would love to go to d5. I think a key to this position is that black doesn't panic. Yes, white's had a few active moves, pushed the pieces back, but it's limited material. And I think, yeah, as I said, trading and playing rook c8, white has the e-file. That's true. But black is a couple moves away from maybe playing f6, king f7. And on top of that, even without that, yes, there's the e-file. How do you use the e-file to your benefit? Because most of the moves you'd like to play, such as rook e7, are taken.
Exactly. I really like the move knight c3, so I wouldn't be surprised to see a move like rook e3, rook c1, just something that stops knight c3, Eric, because I really feel that after knight c3, d5, black is not just thinking about recovering the position, you're actually starting to maybe claim an advantage. When the knight's on d5, you can push b6, you can push b5. Suddenly, it's even Nepo playing for the advantage.
Yeah, white does not want an endgame where that d4 pawn becomes a long-term target. Rook c1 was played. I also thought rook e3, as you mentioned. And one of the ideas might be to play rook c4. That might provoke pawn to b5. Things to be calculated here.
Yeah, and f6 is a great move. It takes control of e5, g5, two squares that both the bishop and the knight for Arjun wanted to make use of. You talked about rook c4. There it is, Eric. b5, knight takes b6, and we have a forced calculation here. Yes, rook takes c7 can be played, but you know what? This is not as bad for Jan as it might look, right? This was a very intentional sacrifice here. He's going to have a phenomenal blockade on d5, but Eric, the material is, you know, that tells the full story. It is a full extra pawn for Arjun Erigaisi.
It's a full extra pawn, but I think the key word you mentioned was intentional. Jan went for this. That just means he's very confident. He can hold his position. You see his body language. He seems quite comfortable. The reason why this is a position where black has some confidence in holding is that knight on d5 is so strong. And even if that knight on d5 was removed and you placed black's king on d5, take away the knights, place black's king on f7 on d5, how do you kick away a king from a light square like that when all you have is a king and a dark squared bishop? There's positions where everything is blockaded, and I think there's great holding chances. So the key here for Arjun, you see knight e1, maybe he's thinking knight c2, knight e3, so he can at least try to initiate a trade, correct his pawn structure, get support for that d pawn.
And this is a move that I was not expecting from Jan. I would have thought that he would want to trade the knights or trade the bishop for the knight. But the bishop trade, although it could be a very forcing line here, is surprising.
I agree. I don't think it's the most precise. Some of the endgames I discussed, they're a bit trickier with knights on the board. There's a way to force the king back. The key line here is to calculate as white. What happens when black brings the king to d5 and maybe the king even to c4? Can Nepo's king get to the queen side before white? So we're looking at knight c2, defending d4, king e6, king f3, king d5, king e3. You just calculate both sides converging towards the middle, and who's faster, who's quicker.
Yeah.
If Arjun gets his king on d3 here with a knight on c2, he has a strong push.
Very strong push. And now all of the stuff we were talking about blockades, Eric, it doesn't exist anymore. Because now if you trade the knights, it'll be a king and pawn endgame, which is almost always winning for white with the advantage of an extra pawn. King to d5, king c4, exactly our variation. He didn't want to play king e4 because of f5, which would have pushed him backwards.
And g4 played by Erigaisi. The key line to look at here is king c3, white plays pawn to d5.
That's right. Yeah, that pawn can go all the way. He plays a5. He's trying to get that pawn to a4 and then maybe play king to b3. But anytime the king moves, watch out for the move d5. And on top of that, I'm also looking at knight e7, Eric. Knight e7, maybe knight d5 check. I could see a few repetitions there. And if white maybe doesn't stick in the center, you can go with king b3 next. And then you've blockaded that pawn.
Yeah, this is tricky because that knight on c2, it's covering a3 and d4, but whenever you push the king up, as we see right now, black has that tempo. You move that king in, you're attacking the knight, and if that knight ever moves, you don't want to lose the a-pawn as white. The only case where it's okay to lose the a-pawn is if you're winning some race with a d-pawn, because black's pawn has already advanced all the way to a5. You win a3, it's an outside passer, so this is all critical. The good thing for the players is they have 4 minutes approximately each heading into this knight king pawn endgame.
And that's a long time to calculate just the endgame here. But let's be clear, Eric, this is a 3-result game. Anyone can win this position, even though white has the extra pawn. So from that perspective, it feels like Jan has done well for himself. Because king b3, you start to get nervous as white. You lose the a-pawn. It is an outside pass pawn, which is the worst thing for a knight to defend.
He is going for it. He's pushed d5, allowing king b3. After knight e5, white can't play king d3 to defend the knight. So what do we play? Is f4 consideration? King takes c2, f takes e5, white wins the race.
Yeah, f4, we might see the knight drop back. Also, knight c4 looks like a good next move. It covers d6, it hits a3. I'm looking at knight d4 check, king takes a3, knight c6. Doesn't look like you can take that pawn. I'm also hitting the a5 pawn. This is it's become a complete mess.
Even though white's up a pawn, there's a lot of stress in terms of losing the a3 pawn and losing a race. I'm okay as white losing both of my pawns on the d and the a file to just get a king and pawn endgame where my king is closer to the remaining pawns on the king's side. But can Arjun get that? Knight c6 you move. I said, I don't mind liquidating. I do not mind liquidating, but I need to win that a5 pawn.
Yep, knight c6,
I need to take the risk away.
At least you can take it. Maybe knight c6, although you can't capture the knight on c6, black can play knight c4, and it's kind of what you're talking about. You are able to maybe sacrifice for that a-pawn, push d6, king d5. It's so tense, these situations where a knight is required to catch a pass pawn, because sometimes, Eric, you can be down the piece and actually winning the endgame.
Yeah, when there's a far passed pawn, the knight's only job is to blockade it. It can't win it. And when that happens, then you can use your king and pick up the rest of the pawns. Arjun would love to do that. He doesn't mind some of those endgames. And we see knight c6 played. It's all about containing the a-pawn. Once the a-pawn is contained, white can focus on the king side and and his d-pawn.
Okay, this is a pure race here. What happens after
A4?
A4? I'm looking at a lot of positions, Eric, where knight d4 happens, knight d4 check, and maybe, are we even possibly getting a draw here because the black king wants to stay protecting that knight?
We could be, unless Arjun sees something really good. Remember, he's down a minute and a half almost. Nepo, really fast the last 10, 15 moves. He's putting pressure on despite being down a pawn. And this race, I don't see anything convincing right now. And it's a tough decision to make. Do you go for it? This is all concrete. But does he have enough time to find those variations?
Well, both players, Eric, are really happy if the other one pushes the pawn because that gives you an opportunity to sacrifice for it. It's counterintuitive, but that's exactly what you want. So you'll probably see the move A3 delayed here by black, and same with the move D6 by white.
I'm expecting F5, but taking is no problem. It doesn't change the fact you trade off the D-pawn and the A-pawn. White's king should be there first. Nepo has to make sure that doesn't happen. Keep the looming threat of A3. What's the move here? Is it knight E5? Oh, yeah. D6.
D6, I mean, I was expecting it to be taken, which I think was completely fine, but he decides to go with knight to E5. And we have a situation where both players want to advance the pawn, but the knight is right there covering.
There's endgames here, Amon, where Nepo will sack his knight for that d-pawn. He will not push A3. He'll just use his king to harass White's knight. If White's king goes too far to pick up that knight, harass the knight on B5. The knight doesn't have good squares to fall back to, and there are repetition ideas.
Yeah, I think this is very likely headed towards a draw. Also, with 1 minute for Arjun, you know, he's not incentivized to do anything too crazy here, and this looks like our repetition, Eric, and a peaceful result in game number 1, a knight endgame. Very tricky. I don't think that there was ever enough for Arjun to really feel bad about this result, but Eric, he was up a pawn.
He was up a pawn, and the way Nepo comfortably held him, that has to be a big confidence booster for Nepomniachtchi. I think that was actually just one of the best played endgames we've probably had the privilege to cover.
Yep.
It's just thematic, using that outside pawn to make it as hard as possible for White to push through, because it shows knights are so bad at stopping those outsiders.
Yeah, and we could see that each knight was entirely chained down to just one square, one responsibility. You can imagine a bishop would be able to perform the same task, but from a long distance where it could attack other things as well. So you can see how poor those knights are at stopping pass pawns, and that's why Nepomniachtchi did the right thing. He went for activity in that endgame, Eric. He wasn't going to sit there and just beat down that pawn, maybe play defense. No, he brought his king actively, aggressively out, and that was the big difference and the reason he was able to secure that draw.
Yeah, everything Nepomniachtchi played was accurate, because if he'd slow down one move, Erigaisi would have been in time to put his king on D3, taking away what we saw in the game where Nepo's king came in and was able to find that B3 square, harass the A-pawn, and that's what helped the game at the end of the day.
And there you go. You mentioned in these 4-game matches, we do see more peaceful results early on. The players kind of feel each other out. You know, what openings are we going to play? What kind of games are we going to play? Jan Nepomniachtchi is a very fast player, and I noticed, Eric, towards the end of that game, while he was down a pawn, he also maintained some very impressive speed. So he made sure to put pressure on Erigaisi on the clock as well. And I think that's going to be something we need to pay attention to in this match, is how is the clock management game between these two players?
I think that game demonstrated some of Nepomniachtchi's abilities. He is an extremely quick and accurate calculator. He trusts himself. Yes, sometimes he'll make some big blunders, but for the most part, that's a strength of his, that he can calculate quickly, he can gain an advantage on the clock. And these players, when you're a fast player, fast calculator, in those end games, 2 minutes left, he might be seeing a little bit further than his opponent. In this game, Arjun, I think, did a great job of always maintaining some control. There's no need to take extra risk there. It's just game 1. He had the white pieces, and a draw is a fair result. And we're about to begin game 2, Nepo with the white pieces.
That's right. Yeah, now it's his turn. You know, we get to see what Nepo is going to do here in game number 2. A reminder that 2.5 is that magic number here, because we're playing this best of 4. Player that gets 2.5 points will win the match. So still a couple wins away for both of these players. But I would say, you know, early on, draw, fair result. Neither player can be too unhappy about that game, but I would be a little happier if I was Nepo. You know, it wasn't maybe the easiest game being down a pawn, but he played very quick. He didn't lose his cool, and I don't think he ever really gave up on the position.
Yeah, and I think if we talk about strategy, when you play the Petrov, I mean, truthfully, it mainly is a drawing weapon. And the way you win games in the Petrov is when your opponent overpresses, desperate to win, creates some weaknesses. That didn't happen, but his job, he played something solid. He got the draw which he was looking for. Now he has the white pieces. I definitely think the ball's in his court now.
Exactly right. A draw is usually considered a good result with the black pieces. White moving first has that slight edge in chess, but Arjun, you know, he's not played as many matches as Nepo, right? He kind of had smooth sailing into this quarterfinal, whereas Jan Nepomniachtchi had to work a little harder. In fact, yesterday, Eric, there was a moment where we thought we might be saying goodbye to Nepo from this event, and you know, it just kind of all turned around in his match against Esipenko. So he's kind of counting his lucky stars to be here, but he's making the most of it, and I like what I saw from him in game number 1. It looks like we are moments away from game number 2.
Yeah, I think talking about it, Nepo hasn't played the best chess, but he's made it into the quarterfinals, and he's a veteran.
Yep.
You let those guys linger in the event, you know their top capabilities, and if he hits his stride, this guy's achieved pretty much everything you can in chess besides that classical world championship title. So just letting players like Nepo of his quality just stay in the event. He is a veteran in playing matches in high stakes chess. At the same time, Arjun, he's joined the world elite in the last couple of years, and he's here to stay. He continues to improve his game. I'm very impressed that even in this 10-minute format, he's made it to the quarterfinals. So it's a very hard match from a prediction perspective.
Yeah, Arjun Erigaisi, we actually talked about the kind of the fan base that came in here supporting Gen G, and I can tell that he's noticed them. They're right behind us here while we're casting, and it's a large crowd, you know, 15, 20 people. We can say it's the largest crowd that we've seen for any player, any match that we've casted here.
Yeah, it's standing room only, so it might not sound like a lot of people, but it's crowded around the players.
Okay, and here we go. It looks like the moves were already underway. I was going to say they look like they were in the thinking pose, Eric.
They did look like they were in the game, but we finally have it in front of us, and we have a Sicilian. A very sharp one that, at first glance, looks to be favorable for Erigaisi. What I see, black's king already castled, white hasn't, that bishop on f6 is active. The pawn on h4 looks funny to me. h4 is a very common move to pry open you know, an opponent's king side, but it doesn't feel very coordinated here. White needs to decide where to castle, but there's a threat. There's knight takes c3, ruining the queenside pawn structure. So if I'm going to queenside castle, I don't want doubled c-pawns. And already a big decision for Nepo. He's like, you know what? Let me play h5. One thing to consider, he hasn't castled. He could castle kingside, but it just feels like black has played standard moves. Meanwhile, Nepo's playing a bit off the cuff here. I even see ideas like when that knight on d5 vacates, that d7 pawn would love to push to d5 for black. Black has potential in the center. Right now, black has that e and d pawn. At some moment, that knight will move. Black will play pawn d7, d5. The e pawn will push to e5. And I can envision a future where Arjun has a significant space advantage.
Yeah, I was going to mention this move. It's kind of the obvious move here. Knight captures on c3 because it accomplishes what you were talking about, Eric. It gets the knight out of the way, allows those central pawns to advance for black, but also, let's just look at the position. It doubles the pawns. Doubled isolated c-pawns are going to appear in the position here. Even if you capture with the bishop, for Nepo, the bishop will capture on c3, and pawn takes on c3. I mean, just looking at the position visually here, the pawn structure is not that good for white. So because of that h-pawn out there, and now because of the doubled isolated c-pawns, Eric, where's the safest place for this king? It's feeling like you could still castle queenside, but that comes with a lot of risk.
Comes with a lot of risk. You can tell already that Nepo doesn't like his position because he's down on the clock, and he's a very confident, quick player. And just look at it structurally. When you just push your h-pawn, you need coordination, you need pieces. I'm not convinced that h-pawn is at the by pushing the h-pawn, black is castled, black is in time to play pawn d7, d5. I keep mentioning that move. Why? Look at the bishop on b3. When I develop my bishop, I want an open diagonal. As soon as black plays that pawn at d5, I don't know what open diagonal I'm looking at, and I don't know how to break through there, especially without weakening my king.
Yeah, I'm actually looking at the king side here because I'm expecting that Jan, of course, wants to play pawn h6 next. So we see queen a5, immediate threat, pawn on c3. It does feel like you can defend this maybe with rook h3, Eric, which I was actually looking at and maybe going to suggest on its own. And that's a move that I feel like for Nepo is really, really easy for him to play because he was considering it regardless. And now it actually defends the c-pawn as well.
I always tell people you can't just attack out of nothing. Your opponent needs to make mistakes for an attack to work. When I see this h-pawn pushing, when I see rook h3, I don't know what Arjun has done incorrectly. I don't think he has done anything incorrectly, so I'm not optimistic about White's attacking chances. Black's done all the right opening principles, developed. Now the queen is there, the rook slides in, rook b5 is a very, very nice looking move. There's ideas to attack h5, ideas to go rook e5, but White has sacrificed a lot to achieve this position. Development has been sacrificed. Pawn structure has been sacrificed. And for what? Is this h-pawn going to win? Are we going to play pawn h5 to h6 and somehow get a checkmate on g7? That's what Nepo's banking on, but I'm certainly not convinced here. I think right now Arjun's doing really, really well. And knowing him, watching his chess, he's a very ambitious player. He's playing this position for a win. He's thinking, how can I get to White's king on c1? Is that going to involve maybe pushing the c-pawn up to c4, trying to open up the b file? But you know what? There's different win conditions. There's the attacking chances, which opposite side castling, maybe both sides. White would like to attack Black's king, vice versa. But structurally, White is at a disadvantage here.
Yeah,
and
you
that's
can also
another
trade.
endgame opportunity.
Exactly. You can trade. You don't have to win just by the attack. Speaking of the attack, queen to a3 check. It's probably the first move that comes to mind here. You know, you just castled, if you're Nepo, into kind of an open file, doubled pawns in front of your king. I was looking at queen a3 and a5, a4, which is still possible even on the next move here. One feature of the move rook e5, I don't really know if Arjun's going to be thinking like this, but you know, if the queen moves anywhere except g4, Eric, you could actually consider just taking on h5. We talk about different win conditions. If you're not believing in the attack here, then maybe you do capture that pawn on h5 and just kind of call the bluff.
Well, he's playing on both sides. He's maintaining attacking opportunities, but he's also introducing positions where White goes into a bad endgame. If the rook slides over to e3, sheltering the queen from the rook, as you mentioned, that h5 pawn is loose. If you play queen to g4, f2 could be loose in some variations. Maybe I throw in rook g5. What targets does Nepo have here to generate counterplay?
Yeah, probably the only thing about Arjun's position that hasn't been realized yet is that bishop on c8. It's actually performing a very important defensive task on the pawn on d7, and if you play d5, it's covering e6, but it hasn't developed yet. We do see queen d2. He prioritized the f2 pawn over the h5 pawn, but what we're seeing here in both games so far is just that little bit of a push from Erigaisi, right? An extra pawn. I wouldn't say he's got anything to complain about from this game.
He's up a full pawn here, and what you'd like to do is Black, find a way to get the kings off. Sorry, queens off. You can't get the kings off. You get the queens off, then your king on g8 goes to e7. I'll eventually start pushing the d-pawn. And if you're wondering why he didn't push the d-pawn earlier, it was controlling, it was still blocking White's bishop, still taking away counterplay, and he just didn't want to give Nepo any targets. Nepo likes to attack. The problem here, e6 might be considered a target, but as long as that bishop on b3 is closed off, I just don't see it. I think if I'm in Nepo's shoes right now, I realize I'm down a pawn. I realize I have no advantage. I'm going to play fast and just make the conversion hard. If I try to generate an attack, I expose my own position and my own faults in like the bishop on b3, the pawn structure. No, I think at this point, just like Arjun tried to convert this, like he did in the previous game, Nepo just went down a pawn, played quickly and confidently, put up stubborn defense. I don't see what other option there is here.
And there's some big threats on the board coming. The queen just went back to c6, to b6, excuse me. So the c6 pawn moving up to c5, moving up to c4. Eric, even if we don't win that bishop, I'm concerned that the bishop's going to retreat to a2, maybe if you move your king first, and the bishop is 100% trapped on that square. So c5, c4 is not just about maybe winning the bishop, but also just trapping it.
As you mentioned, it traps the bishop. You push that pawn to c4. White doesn't have a d-pawn or b-pawn to pry that open, to play d3 or b3. So you're right. If Black gets c5, c4, I think this game will
C4,
be over.
C4 was forced, Eric. I'm willing to say forced, because if black played C4, the bishop would be 100% locked out of the game. This looks like a terrible move. The bishop is practically trapped now, but at least in the future, you can move that other C pawn on C2, and the bishop can make use of the B1H7 diagonal. So this doesn't look pretty. I expect D4, keeping the pawns on dark squares. Big achievements for Arjun, but I do think that Nepo had to play this move.
Yeah, I think Nepo's doing the right things right now. He's back a little bit on time. And you mentioned the move D4. I think D4 makes sense. Pushes on a dark square. You don't want to allow White's bishop to join the game easily. But when you play a move like D4, you're also losing some squares these last couple of moves. Maybe Nepo puts his queen on E5. Look at that queen on E5. It puts pressure on C5, puts long-term pressure on that E6 pawn. And yes, White's position looks ugly, but at the end of the day, it's up to Arjun to figure out, how am I going to make progress here? How am I going to trade? How do I get the queens off? How do I get the rooks off? And even looking at that E6 pawn, another question is, how can I bring this bishop on C8 as an active piece in the game, not just, you know, sitting on C8 or D7 defending E6.
Yeah, let's remember, it hasn't moved yet. Matter of fact, he hasn't completed development as of yet. Rook F4,
nice
much
move.
more aggressive move. So if the pawn on C4 captures on D5, immediately we're looking at pawn to C4. Hitting that bishop, it is pinned thanks to the queen on B6. So this move is much different than D4. I think they're both good moves, but I mean, this is really going for it, Eric.
A5, I love it. Nepo is a sharp player. He's looking for active solutions. If you take on A5, then we once again have to calculate C takes D5 because there's no more pin on the B file.
There's no more pin. That is a crafty move there. And even if you sort of decline it, don't accept this pawn sacrifice, move your queen backwards, that's not where you want your queen. Queen B7, queen B8, just in order to maintain the connection there.
Things are getting very sharp here because in some position you might be able to take on D5.
Yeah.
It requires calculation. C takes D5, pawn C4, and the question is, can I then play a move like G3? There's a lot of calculation involved right now. It helps that Arjun's bishop is in the game because, yes, black is banking on C4 working if you take on D5, but that requires the rook to stay on the fourth. So Nepo's looking to take on D5 and meet a move like C4 with a move like Queen E3 or G3. I think G3 is required first. It just depends. Can that rook stay on the fourth? If it can, that's great for the attacking chances. If it can't, this might be a chance for Nepo to get back in the game. And Queen E5, I love that move, Amon.
Yeah, it's a different way to try to get back in the game. Yes, you're trading queens. You are down a pawn. Matter of fact, you might even be down another pawn after pawn takes on C4, but you have rook takes on C5 that you can throw in there. This is not necessarily just, only chances for Arjun. I think that with the D pawn loose here, you have to make some big decisions if you're Arjun Erigaisi.
You mentioned the key line. You take on C4. I have the Zwischenzug, the in-between move. Rook takes C5, hitting the bishop on C8 with check. Arjun plays King F7. He might meet C takes D5 with King F6, bring the king a bit closer. But all of a sudden, we have material equality here.
Yeah, this has been a big comeback for Nepo. He's also still up that time, that 30 seconds. He's a very, very confident and quick player. You can't take on E6 with the pawn. King takes on E5, E7. The bishop can still catch that pawn with bishop D7. So you have to move your rook away here. So if you go rook back to E1, rook E3, I guess we're going to see pawn to C4 and try to take that D pawn, Eric.
Are there any in-between moves here? G3 is always the move I'm looking at because if you play, oh, he takes here first. I was going to mention, if you play G3, maybe you can harass the rook. Nepo goes for this line. I think okay, the decision is obvious. It's bishop A4 or bishop A2. With bishop A4, you have to watch out for C3 check. And now the rook on F4 hits A4. He plays bishop C2.
Yeah, now C3 doesn't work the same way, so he's going to go on the other side of the board. H5, H4, G5. The bishop on A2 is out of the game right now, but White can play King C3. The thing is, look at that bishop on A2. It is 100% not participating here, so you're going to see moves like G5 for Arjun. He's not looking to do anything because it's White who is struggling for a move.
Yeah, and what you mentioned, pushing on the king's side, this position might be equal material, but it's not an equal position. If black ever manages to win g2 in a race, that outside h-pawn is very, very close to queening. And those pawns on g2 and f3 are in light squares.
You're playing up a piece, Eric.
Yeah.
The bishop on a2 goes back to b1, cannot move away. So much effort. That's why you see g4. He's trying to open things up, crash through. There's bishop d5, the rook on g4. You're basically playing 2-on-1 here.
If you can't win that pawn on c4, you're completely right. And Nepo's not making any moves that contribute there. He's choosing passive defense. When Jan is playing passive defense, you know he's not comfortable.
Yeah, he always likes to solve his problems actively, but I mean, it is just plain and simple.
What
The
a
bishop
move.
on a2 cannot participate in this game. The g2 pawn will fall, and at this point, you can even take with the bishop and just play h3, h2, h1 queen.
It's the best way to do it. You take on g2 with the bishop and you're sheltering. Then you play h3, h2. But you know what? What's the rush? g2 will fall regardless. Arjun is saying, I'm going to optimize my king position first. There might be a position where the king gets the c5 pawn, and then he throws in the rook g3 check first, forces the king further back, and then takes on g2.
King c5 certainly here looks like the right move. Activating that king, as you said, intending rook g3, and rook g3 comes with an even bigger threat of c3 after. I think you have to take this pawn. I mean, it's been so many moves without actually capturing this g-pawn. It's finally time.
He's just deciding, does he take first or does he throw in c3? Nepo is down almost 20 seconds.
You can probably run the h-pawn, h3, h2, but you know what? You start to get a little nervous. Don't want to lose a7.
I think you can just run it because your bishop controls the queening square. So he's just pushing h3, h2.
That's
he
it.
Slides the rook over. He's making a queen, and he still covers a8.
And
this is a lost position for Jan.
This is looking effortless. Arjun Erigaisi, he's up on time. He just needs to slide that rook over, and he has done rook f2. Notice the bishop on d5. Compare it to the bishop on a2. d5 covers h1, helps black queen. It also stops white from queening. It's doing everything.
Nepo's taking a breather here. I think he knows he's in lost position. He's just trying to stabilize his thoughts. But how depressing is it to play this full game without your bishop? What a win by Erigaisi.
Wow. Arjun Erigaisi with the win for Gen.G. And remember, of course, Eric, this is not the end of the match, but it is a big step in the right direction for Arjun. Both games he's been up upon. In one of them, he finally got the conversion. That's a pretty big deal and a lot of confidence going into the next one. Yeah, I'm looking at this this game, Eric, and just thinking back on it, Arjun has looked really, really good in this matchup, right? Compared to Nepo, he's had chances in both games. He's converted in one of them. He could have converted in both. You have to be feeling confident if you're Arjun.
Yeah, he's pushing the pace. When we joined in that second game, I mentioned from the start, Arjun had a great opening position. Nepo's bishop was out of the game. It was out of the game until the very end.
Yeah.
You can't afford to play like that against a guy like Arjun. There are players that Nepo is capable of overwhelming. He's very tactical. He solves bad positions by out-tricking you, out-calculating you. Arjun is that's his strength as well, and he's proven that even in this game. Even when Nepo broke free, it felt like he was stabilizing.
Yeah.
Arjun continued to put pressure on and made it very uncomfortable.
And I think one of the most impressive things in that game that we saw is that Nepo did have moments where the position looked like he was making a small comeback and it was destabilizing. But as you said, he maintained his composure in those moments. He made sure that it never turned into an advantage for Nepo. And ultimately, that's why he's up 1.5 to half. And the players are going to be taking a break themselves, which means we are going to do the same. We'll be back with game number 3 after this break.
There's a lot of pressure on my shoulders to make my mom and dad proud.
It's the best feeling watching him live out his dream.
It's this pressure that you have on you that if you don't win, you lose your job.
Kita udah nunjukin kalau ladies itu juga tetap bisa bersaing di scene cowok.
No big deal, just the hopes and dreams of thousands of supporters riding on one kid's split-second decisions and lightning-fast hands.
You can do this. I believe in each and every one of you, but the mission's not done.
You want to make a run at the title, you have to run a gauntlet of competition.
Competing at this level comes with a lot of sacrifice.
The thing is about these top teams, it's win or bust.
For some of these players, that's their life.
Welcome to the Esports World Cup.
This is the Super Bowl, the World Cup, and the Olympics, all rolled into one event for the first time ever.
We are coming for you.
If you're betting against me, that's going to wake me up and get me to playing best I can.
I fucking got the shit. You heard that?
Nothing is granted, everything is earned.
Is your job on the line?
I believe it's on the line, as it should be.
Welcome back, everyone. The Esports World Cup continues. This is the chess quarterfinals. Eric, we've been covering Arjun Erigaisi, Jan Nepomniachtchi. We're sort of at that halfway point, but I will point out that this is actually match point for Arjun. If he wins, he moves to 2.5. That's enough to win the match.
That's the key score, and just looking at the first half of this match, you have to tip your cap to Arjun. He's pressing both games. Uncomfortable situation for Jan. When you talk about Jan Nepomniachtchi as a player, he's very resourceful, he's very quick, he's very tactical. It feels like in both games, Arjun has taken away a lot of that venom.
Yeah, you even mentioned it. We actually saw Jan Nepomniachtchi kind of defending passively because he just had no other choice, because Arjun was kind of strangling the life out of the position. So it's been a very impressive match from a strategy perspective. So far, he's getting his positions, and most importantly, he's getting positions that Jan doesn't seem comfortable with.
That's all it takes. In 10-minute chess, you can't think too much. You get uncomfortable. Everyone has seen Jan's body language. He can beat himself up, but he finds a way back into the game. Arjun, he's managing to really restrict that. If that continues, it's a really uphill battle, but we're back to game 3.
Here we go. We're starting with E4, the Sicilian here. And, you know, immediately, Jan choosing this opening, he's looking for a fight, but also he knows he needs to get back into this match. It's not just that he needs a win right here, but he just needs a game, Eric, that is more inspiring, that gives him a bit of confidence. Even a draw here in a good way would give him a lot of confidence for the next one.
A draw where he's putting pressure on his opponent, absolutely. It cannot be understated. That last game was a disaster. That opening was bad. There was no pressure. Arjun had a good position. Whether you're playing black or white, that was a great position for black objectively. He had the opportunity to attack. He had the opportunity with the end game grind, which we ended up seeing. That's how he took home the point. Can't give Arjun that much space. He's got to play tighter here.
That's right, and Arjun also has the white pieces here, so this is kind of a, I mean, for obvious reasons, a very important match, but you know, it could all end here, and Arjun has the white pieces, sort of has the initiative to maybe do so. And we see the move F4. He's not holding back here, Eric. F4, when you think about the move F5, yes, it hits that bishop on E6. It's a huge consideration here. If the bishop would capture the knight on B3, white would capture back, and the light squares in Jan's position would be quite weak all of a sudden. So the move bishop C4 is usually the reaction to F5.
Yeah, and one thing to notice, and we're watching this throughout the EWC, is we have so many sharp young players in the event. Arjun is up in this match, but he's not afraid to enter really, really tactical, aggressive positions against Jan. It shows he's very confident, and he knows. How does he win this match? Just plays his style of chess. It's working right now. Don't deviate. Some players, they're up in the match. They do change the strategy. Like, you know what? I'm going to play a bit more solid. This isn't solid at all. White's castled. Jan is, you know, he's got his rook on C4. One of the ideas here for White, when you're ahead in development, is to make your opponent uncomfortable before they can castle. What am I looking at if I want to make my opponent uncomfortable? A move like g4. g4 looks a bit wild, but if I can push that pawn to g5, black is lacking a little bit of space on the king side.
We see knight d2 to kick the rook out. So most likely, the rook is going to move back, but there's so many options, c6, c7, c8. He decides to pick the obvious rook c8. Now, in terms of a slower move, a3 can be considered here by Arjun, just to prevent b4, kind of an annoying move that forces your knight to move. This is so direct that we know the continuation is going to be b4 and knight d5.
Arjun will not play moves like a3 unless he feels it's necessary. He's here to put pressure on Jan.
Yep, you called it, and he's not holding back here. The e4 square has suddenly become available for white's knight. Queen d3 can follow up. The a6 pawn is a potential target, and most importantly, if the knight jumps into the c5 square, you might see a situation where Arjun willingly gives away that dark squared bishop for the knight in order to sort of put his knight on the e4 square and play all on the light squares against that dark square bishop for Jan.
Definitely, knight c5, I like that move. You give up the bishop, but if you can plant a knight on e4, that's fantastic. I like a5 as well. One of my ideas is to consider moving my b pawn to b3. Why? I would like to place my knight on d2 on c4. It frees up my queen. It targets d6. I can use the b6 square. But with knight f6 being played by Nepo, we have d5 hanging here. Question for Arjun.
Yeah, and a question that needs answering. Nepo is almost at 9 minutes here, so he's got a big time advantage. And to be honest, just looking at the body language, he's looking much more comfortable than we have seen him so far. Knight f6 hits the d5 pawn. It also prevents knight e4. The knight on d2 can't quite make it to that c4 square. You wanted b3, Eric, but it takes a few moves to get there. b3, knight c4, he doesn't have time. There's also no time for knight e4. So how do you actually defend the d pawn? Well, if you take your knight on d2 and you move it to f3, yes, temporarily you've defended d5, but the knight on f3 is not at all where you want to put that piece. So he's in a tough spot because all the squares he wants to move that knight are not really possible.
Yeah, knight f3, for the reasons you mentioned, is an ideal. You want your knight on e4 or c4, but you can't afford to lose the d5 pawn. If you play queen f3, defending d5, c2 is loose. Look at the clocks. Clearly, if this was in Arjun's prep or something he was comfortable with, he wouldn't be down 2.5 minutes with white this early on.
Exactly. Knight f6 was played very quickly from Jan. This was a move that said no problem. If you play bishop b6, hitting the black queen, supported by that a5 pawn, he's happy to take a step forward with the queen. Queen d7 puts pressure on f5. Remember, the d5 pawn is still hanging. And if the knight captures on d5, suddenly the bishop would also be hanging on b6. So there's so many reasons why the position is just easy for Jan to play. Not to mention, he's got easy moves like castling next.
Another drawback of bishop b6, I'm happy to play queen d7 pressuring f5, but that queen on d7 can slide over to b5. And on b5, that's an additional attacker on d5 for black. And just look at white's pieces. They're not in position to support d5. That's the center pawn. When white castles early, gets a lead in development, you want something tangible in return. You lose your center. That's it. That's a big advantage for black. Right now, Nepo is doing very well. And again, the body language, the clock usage tells the story. You do not want to be down 2, 3, 4 minutes this early on with easy counterplay for Nepo. His move wasn't hard. Knight f6. That's one of the most natural moves in the position. Arjun has clearly missed something to end up in the think tank this early on.
This is not looking good. I wonder, do you consider queen f3? Because Eric, we can talk about how easy this move was for Nepo to play, but the position is difficult. What do you even do as Arjun? He decides on knight b3, but look at the scope of that knight.
The queen's coming to c4 here. The knight is terrible on b3. It has no future squares. That's why I'm saying it's terrible. It can't jump to d4. It can't go to c5. It's only there to free up the queen to defend d5. But what does that mean? White is choosing passive defense, and when he spent that much time, he must have recognized that was the only option. He's not happy to play this. Big pressure for Jan this early on.
If knight e4 happens, then the rook can go to e2 to sort of keep everything defended for the moment. Knight g4, just not really enough just yet. You can keep that bishop. I think he's probably just going to take it easy. Castles. Bring the rest of the pieces in. He doesn't need to rush at this point, but the only move that looks really challenging is maybe knight g4.
Knight g4 is challenging. I might place my bishop on b6 there. Queen e4 is going for more. As you mentioned, castling, you maintain the advantage. Why do I think black has the advantage? The pieces are more active, and white's pawns are loose on d5 and f5. Queen e4 is saying, they are so loose that I can pick up a pawn before even castling. That's what he's arguing for right now, that either c2 or d5 or f5 will fall. And we see that queen on e4. That is a pretty nice square. It really does hit the bishop and those 3 pawns.
It hits everything.
What can Arjun play here?
I mean, I'm looking at queen f3. It's not a pretty looking move. You will double your f-pawns, but it feels like, Eric, he's already committed to that very passive style of defense. Once you start down that path, you kind of have to commit to it. So queen f3 looks like the expected move.
It was the only move to defend everything.
Yep.
And I'm not sure Nepo should be giving Arjun only moves instead of tough decisions.
That's right.
Is black still doing well here? Yes, but those doubled pawns on the f-file, they might have some positives. The f3 pawn controls e4 and g4 from black's knight, and the f5 pawn, I wouldn't say it's a great pawn, but it's not easy to just be picked off. That bishop on e3, fortunately, it covers the f4 square from black's rook, so you can't just slide in and take it. But Nepo's going for quick play here. King d7 indicates my king's in the middle. I'm going to shift my rook from h8 to c8, and you might have to play a move that like knight a1 that no one wants to play, but we can't afford to lose any pawns. And we can't afford to lose that rook on d2, even with an even trade. The key to this position, if Nepo manages to win the d5 pawn outright, that will be a winning advantage.
Eric, the move knight a1 has just been played, and dare I say that potential next move could be b3, which would actually temporarily trap the knight in the corner. But b3 has an idea to win the b4 pawn. So this move makes more sense.
Rook b5 maybe.
Yeah.
Because I always say the d5 pawn is the weakest pawn in the position, and if you win it, you get to push your center. White loses everything. It forces bishop b6.
Bishop d8, right? I mean, just remove the bishop. A little bit of calculation, maybe about b3.
Well, there was bishop d8, but I was also curious about moves like rook f4. Everything looks good for Nepo here. The knight on a1. You know what? This looks similar to a game Nepo just lost. He had his bishop stuck. In this case, Arjun has a knight on a1. Can it join the game? Sure, it can go back to b3, but on b3, we've already spoken about this. It has no future. It needs a good square, and it's many, many moves away from that.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the worst square on the chessboard that you can put a knight is the corner. It can only move to 2 squares there, has reduced scope, and after the bishop exchange, there's really nothing that's going to stop rook b5, rook f4, rook c5. Eric, all these pawns are so weak. a5, c2, d5, f5, f3. I mean, I'm running out of breath just naming all of these weaknesses.
Opening disaster for Erigaisi. I think he's already lost. I mean, positionally lost. You pointed out all the weaknesses, but we didn't point out the strengths, because I don't see any strengths in White's position. There's no counterplay. When you're fighting back, when you're challenging your opponent, you need to be able to put on pressure. But where are the pressure points? d6 and a6 are somewhat loose, but White can't access those squares. And here the center falls. Yep. The knight is still on a1. The knight on d5 is looking at a great square potentially on
this
f4,
is hopeless.
On e3. 5 minutes and a half clock advantage for Nepomniachtchi, and he's really looking to equalize with black right here.
I was even looking at a move like b3 here. Rook takes c4, pawn takes on c2, looking to queen, and then maybe knight e3 at the end.
Amon.
But that's the thing. The position is so good that we're at the point you can consider stuff like that.
But it might work.
Yeah, it might force like knight b4 or something that, you know,
well, we
just
can't
be
afford
completely
to
winning.
go down 2 pawns. And
okay, he's kind of done the exact same idea in a different way, but look, he's got that. Oh, beautiful. He's got that
on g2, knight e3. It's the same idea, the same geometry that you mentioned.
Wow.
Nepo finds it. We know what he thrives in. And
wow.
What a victory to equalize the match.
And just how quickly he did it. He's got 7 minutes at the end of the game. It looked effortless. We talked about the positions that he thrives in, and wow, he just took control of that game early, and to be honest, he made it look easy. We saw some good games from Arjun to start the match, but is this a momentum swinger?
This is a momentum swinger. We spoke about Nepo's strengths. We saw when he has the advantage, when he puts on pressure, he's fast, he converts well, he finds those tactics. Look how long it took him to find the game-winning variation, but this is exactly what you don't want to allow when you're playing Nepo, and it didn't take a lot.
No.
When we ask what went wrong in the opening for Arjun, Nepo played this knight f6 move, which is innocuous. It's a standard move. I'm just developing my knight. And all of a sudden, white was in a world of hurt. That was clearly a big opening mishap from Arjun to give Nepo so much counterplay. He can't afford to do that. And now he's going to be playing black as we enter the 4th game.
Yep. Jan Nepomniachtchi, Aurora Gaming, has the white pieces now. It feels like the entire match kind of shifted there because that's not just a regular loss, Eric. That's a tough loss. That's a tough one to come back from. Your mental feels a little bit shattered. Nepo didn't have a great opening in Game 2, but I don't think it even compares to the disaster of Game 3.
This was not a competitive game whatsoever. There wasn't a single hard decision for Nepo that game. You don't want to ever be in that spot. You're right, the momentum has shifted. This is breathing life into Nepo's match chances. And I think, though, one thing, we missed the opening in Game 2 where Nepo was not doing well. Let's see what changes here. He's probably feeling more comfortable. And you know what's different? Maybe he doesn't feel like he needs to prove something or do something. He doesn't need to go all out so early on, because Arjun has punished him when he's been a little sloppy early on.
And this is what the score does to the decisions early on. It being a tied match right now, you know, the players do not have to go all out. When Nepo was down, you know, 1.5 to half, he probably felt like absolutely he needs to win. He needs to do something. But now he can relax a little bit. There is Armageddon in the event of a tie. So if we have a draw in this match, we will go to Armageddon, Eric, which means that he looks like he's playing a bit more comfortably. Early on, we can see an opening that's come from the Catalan.
Yeah, Nepo has well, both of these players, they play everything. But we're not repeating the Sicilian from Game 2. That went really poorly for white. Early on, pressure already. Is this within theory? Yes. But if you're in black's shoes here, you're playing Arjun, I have to contain that bishop on G2. Because white has the bishop pair early on. What's the compensation? That's the question. Are you giving white just a bishop pair and not winning a pawn or anything back? It's looking like that right now, and then I'm already favoring white's position. I like Nepo's position. If he wants, he can simply play pawn to E3, castle, and he has a future push where eventually that E3 pawn will push to E4, but white has time. That bishop on G2 is a great piece. All I need now, I want a castle, I want to place my knight on C3, and I don't think Arjun likes that, and he's played H5. A bit counterintuitive when you're playing against the bishop pair. Does it really favor you to open up the position? Let's see how aggressive he's willing to go, because in my eyes, feels like white is in a better spot for the position opening up.
Completely agree. I mean, this is definitely nowhere near the opening disaster we just saw, but I will say that this is a very comfortable position for Nepo. He has everything you could ask for from the opening. I won't say that it's only a 2-result game, because we have a long way to go, especially with this move, long castle from Arjun. He's definitely indicating some intentions on the king side. He's saying, okay, castle king side if you dare. So I wonder what Nepo is going to do with his king.
F5 is an interesting move, and I like it. The purpose of it is you want to discourage white from playing E4. If white ever pushes a pawn to E4, black will take, and yes, black's E6 pawn is weak, but then white's D4 pawn will be weak. So Nepo probably isn't looking to play E4. He's playing moves like rook C1, maintaining flexibility. But seeing the way Arjun's playing this opening, he's playing very provocatively.
Very.
What does that tell me? If Nepo castles kingside, look for black to play G5.
Yep. That move it might happen even if he doesn't. But you know what? After that last move by Nepo, rook to C1, that indicates that he can no longer castle on the queen side here. So either the king is staying in the middle, or it will have to castle kingside. I can imagine, you know, maybe a move like A3, B4, knight A4 to C5 is another idea, but it does feel like Nepo's in this kind of no man's land at the moment, Eric, because he doesn't want to castle. He sees the aggression from Arjun, but if you don't castle, you're also at risk in the center.
And that's the E5 move, played immediately. When the knight was on C3, E5 wasn't possible. There's too much pressure on D5. Now E5 is playable, and if you take on E5, you allow that knight on C6, it's taking on E5, hitting the queen, and the D file is opening up, and white's not ready yet for the whole middle to open up. He hasn't chosen to castle. Great response by Arjun.
Yeah, I'm surprised by knight A4. You know, without castling, without having that move in, knight A4 is very provocative, and Arjun has been playing in that style the entire game. He's waiting to get a move like e5 in, a move like g5. And in this case, it is perfectly timed in the center. Eric, it's difficult to react to. Yes, you can play knight c5, but things are falling apart, and your king in the middle means that when the e-pawn captures on d4, you have to watch out on the e-file.
Not only that, when e takes d4, the e-file opens up, and there's just a long-term weakness on d4, an isolated pawn. Yes, white has the bishop pair, but black seems to be very active and very happy despite that. Arjun playing aggressively, finding the right moves. Nepo has slowed down, as I said. Not every player is like this, but when Jan starts slowing down, there's a couple options. Maybe he's looking for the kill, or he's uncomfortable. In this case, he's uncomfortable. He just had an opening advantage, and it's completely disappeared.
It has.
By giving up your best piece, that bishop on g2, that's not a good thing.
And knight c3 here is the move that makes the most sense. But you know what could happen, Eric? Knight c3, rook back to d7. If you take on e5, which looks like one of the only moves, the knight recaptures, and immediately knight d3 is a huge problem because knight d3 also comes with potentially knight takes on f2 afterwards.
Yeah, look at white's dark squared bishop. Black also has one, and black has their pawns on light squares. Feels like black is better suited for light square play right now. And what's the compensation? You're playing white, you're supposed to play for advantage. To me, black is comfortably equalized, and the play will revolve around the d-file. King e2 is a good move. I don't see a great response from Arjun here that will really press white. But at the end of the day, we're not talking about an advantage for Nepo anymore. It's how he can stabilize and catch up in development and equalize again.
Exactly.
When you have Nepo on the back foot, you're doing well. Arjun is doing well right now.
Yeah, bishop f6. We have, pawns on light squares, h5, f5 for Arjun. And all those dark square pawns on the king side, it's tough to advance them at the moment. We're probably going to see moves like, of course, rook to d1. But, with knight d3 still there, I think he was concerned. So he plays rook c2. Maybe if knight c4, he can drop the bishop back to c1. And for now, knight d3 is not as impactful. It's still a great move, but it doesn't come with an initial threat.
Yeah, I think this is still fairly close to equal, but from the position we had, that's an accomplishment for Erigaisi. The question, I think he's going to spend time the next couple of moves because he recognizes that Nepo isn't too far away from completing development.
Yep.
That rook on h1 needs to join the game. Is white active? No, but he can't ask for everything. Just needs to get that rook into the game and watch out for any threats from Arjun. What would a threat be? Maybe knight b4. Maybe knight b4 and a2 is loose in some lines. Nepo plays knight a4, covering the b4 square. Maybe in the future I'm going to swing my rook from h1 to b1, but there's a threat. Once again, knight takes f2. After you double the rooks, there's a knight takes f2 on the board right now. How will Nepo respond?
And playing a move like rook d1 also walks you into a potential pin on the d-file. You could never move your bishop because of knight f4 check. So you have to be very careful how you choose to defend this. Yes, rook f1 is possible, but I'm going to start thinking about moves like potentially even b5, Eric. Like, I think you can really start to get aggressive here with the position. Pawn to c5, pawn to b5. I think Arjun has a lot to play for.
You're right. Well, b5 is a threat. b5, if knight c5, I can trade. d2 is loose. b5, if knight c3, I have knight b4, and the rook on c2 has no squares in the second rank, so d2 is loose. So I see threats on f2. I see your b5 move. Big think required here. He's played bishop c3. I looked at this, and I was looking at bishop takes c3 Amon, because if rook takes c3, I thought there might be knight takes b2 with a tactic.
Yep, that is a great move.
But if you
means the knight has to take back,
If you take back with a knight, I have knight b4.
And rook d2
rook d2
happens
is coming.
anyway.
But then the only other move is pawn takes.
Yeah.
But pawn takes is you're weakening your pawn structure.
It's a concession.
It's a concession.
It is, and I think that might have to be played as we've kind of gone through all the options here, and Arjun will have no doubt done the exact same. He captures, and Nepo pawn takes c3 looks absolutely required here. It would be a huge mistake, Eric, if he took with anything other than the b pawn here.
I'm surprised he hasn't recaptured right away. There we have it. Arjun with about 70 seconds more on the clock, and he's doing very well. But at the end of the day, material's even. Nepo is a tremendous fighter. Can Arjun continue to find ways to restrict Nepo? That's a key to the match. Don't give him tactics. Don't give him counterplay. This is game 4. So as black, I'm very happy to steer this towards a 2-result position. 2-result position, I want to be up on the clock, and I want a better pawn structure. I want to maintain that. If I fall behind on the clock versus Nepo, he's scored so many wins like that in his career.
Yep, absolutely. C5. Now, there's an idea to play C4 to support the knight, but you also just want to maybe play C5 and then B6 next. The knight can always drop back to E5. I think B6 to support the pawns makes a lot of sense here. You can start to bring the king up, king C7, king C6. It feels like Arjun can improve his position with more moves than Nepo can, but look out for C4 because it has one idea. Yes, it gives up the B4 square, Eric, but maybe Nepo wants to play A3 and bring that knight on A4 to C3 and into D5.
One thing to look at when we have a position like this that's not fully equal or symmetrical. Why? Black has 3 pawns on the queen side versus 2. White has 4 pawns on the king side versus 3. Which side will use their majority and gain space with that? It looks right now that you mentioned a plan for black. Bring that king into C6. Maybe then I'll play A6, B5, start pushing you back. Nepo, it's not very easy to push the pawns on the king side with those rooks on the D file. If you play F3, it feels like you're weakening E3, F3, G3. If that's the only other move. So he's playing passive moves. He doesn't feel comfortable going for anything yet. But rook B1, I wonder what that's threatening. I mean, it doesn't have to threaten something. I guess one idea when the king is on B8 is the knight ever moves for black. Knight takes C5 is an idea.
Yep.
This might be a perfect moment to play king C7.
And I actually was looking at the move A3. I really liked A3 just to never have to deal with knight B4. It didn't feel like black was threatening anything immediately. So I was liking A3, knight C3, and then maybe knight D5 or leave the knight on C3. So we have to deal with knight B4 now.
The issue with this A3 move where I said knight D5 in the future is if black gets their king on C6 and maybe you find a way to get your knight on D5, black will have this idea of taking on C4.
Yep.
And that knight will always be loose. I know this is far off, but it's not the most stable outpost because C4 is weak.
That's right. Unfortunately now, not only do you not have A3, you don't have knight C3. I'm concerned now for Nepo's position in a very real way. Rook D3 played from Arjun. I think he's starting to...
That's a fantastic
He's turning
move.
this into a serious advantage. Rook A3 traps the knight, wins the knight. What do you do about it? You almost have to play rook B3, Eric, but
allowing rook
then rook
D2?
D2.
No, allowing rook D2, that's a full pawn, and I get command of the second rank?
Well, how do you stop rook A3? You have to play like rook C1 and try to play knight back to C3. So I feel like rook C1 is probably the move, but then rook A3, knight D3.
Yeah, rook C1, rook A3, knight C3, knight D3 is winning, I think.
I think it's just winning.
For
Because
Nepo's
even the rook
shaking.
on C1 hangs with check.
Do you know what he just did? I think he just pressed arrows on his keyboard. It looks like he went back to see what he played. I could be wrong. I saw some hand movement, but it looked almost like he was wondering, what did I just do?
What did he
I didn't
just
like
do?
rook B1 whatsoever, and he committed further. He played rook B2, and he's out of moves right now.
Yep.
Nepo is such a resourceful player. He needs to
But
find
the resources
something
have to
here.
be there. You can't find something that's not there. Rook D3 is calm, cool, collected. He's up 2+ minutes on the clock. And Eric, I don't see an answer to rook A3. The only way to keep material is to allow rook D2.
You want to sack the exchange sometimes, but it's not even a good exchange because you can't take back on B4. Rook B4, C B4. If you take back, I have rook D2 and I pick off A2 anyways. White's not even getting any sort of material recovery in those lines. Rook A3 is a threat. I think, Amon, you're right. Rook B3 has to be played, but we're staring at a lost position.
That's terrible.
Nepo's at 2.5 minutes. He just banged the table.
It's terrible.
No, I'm pretty sure he's using the arrows. I'm looking at his camera. He's thinking, how
did I allow this to happen?
this with white? This is game 4. I've put my opponent under no pressure, and my knight's about to be trapped. Rook A3, hitting the knight. It has to go to C3. It all comes down. Does knight D3 work? Wow. Knight takes B2, rook takes D8, king C7. No, he just takes it.
So if knight C1, he wants to take that. So he's actually won the knight back with rook D2. He's pinned it to the rook on D8. But he's facing, I was going to say, rook C2. And Eric, he's just going to lose so many pawns. But, you know, I credit Nepo for finding a variation.
It's a variation, but the reason he hesitated going into this is he realizes he can try to pick off some kingside pawns, but he's staring at 3 connected queenside passers.
Yeah, it's lost.
His king is on F3. It's not even a position that he feels like he can trick his opponent. He didn't play this quickly. This was reluctantly.
Yep. I think he'll throw some checks in. Okay, we'll see B5, I assume, from...
You could potentially...
He could just keep pushing.
Arjun has a couple of minutes. He's looking for more.
And it's not even close in terms of a race. Even though he grabbed one pawn on f5 there, look at the white pawns, e3, f2. They are not even close to making a threat.
So you just push the pawn to c2 and push the other pawn to b3, right?
I think so.
Look at Nepo's body language. He knows resignation is coming.
He knows it's lost.
Arjun needs to find a move, and there's many winning moves here.
He has 4 minutes to find it, Eric. He's managed the clock perfectly. It's been just a brilliant game. He's chosen this. This looks like it'll be enough.
Pawn goes to b5. The pawn's going to push down the board. Push and push.
Yeah, you can't even play rook b5 to win it because you have to watch the c1 square. The c pawn will become a queen. This is it, Eric.
The rook is coming to a1.
That's it.
And that's it.
Wow. Arjun Erigaisi, Gen G defeats Jan Nepomniachtchi from Aurora Gaming, and Jan has been eliminated. Eric, what a turnaround after what looked like a momentum shift in Game 3.
What a turnaround. He took his chance.
Truly, truly impressive, a deserved winner, and actually, you know, our first winner here in the quarterfinals. Eric, he moves on to the semifinals with an incredible performance. Honestly, you know, out of those 4 games, he played better in the large majority of them. He kind of had that blip in Game 3. We didn't like that game from him at all. An easy win for Nepomniachtchi, but he turned it right back around.
He turned it right back around, and Nepo is, you know, he's still thinking, how did that happen? I lost my games with white, and it comes down to one move in Game 4. He played a lazy move. Arjun is such a sharp player. Punished him immediately, and we have one of our first semifinalists.
Exactly right. Arjun Erigaisi, he is through. Absolutely huge for Gen G as well, Eric. And, you know,